Hey team, welcome back to another episode of the Strength Game Podcast. I'm your host, Nick O'Brien, and this is episode number 5. The Strength Game is a weekly podcast dedicated to discussing all things physical culture with the coaches, athletes, iron enthusiasts, and experts deeply embedded in the strength game on both sides of the profession, both as coaches and as competitive athletes. I want to thank all of you who have liked, shared, subscribed, and commented. Your support allows us to continue to bring on expert guests and highlight more individuals in the strength game, just like our guest today. And I'm excited. In this week's episode, I'm joined by my former boss and lifetime mentor, Sean Foster. He's currently the Assistant Athletic Director for Athletic Performance at American University in Washington, D.C. In his role, he currently oversees all strength conditioning activities for the university's 14 varsity teams, in addition to serving as an adjunct instructor within the Department of Health Studies. He's the primary coach for both men's and women's basketball, volleyball, field hockey, and men's soccer, where during his short time, they've won 11 Patriot League titles since first arriving in 2013. Prior to his current position, he's also been an assistant coach at Georgetown University and worked at multiple high schools in the DMV area. Sean has competed at both strongman and weightlifting and continues to train in weightlifting in his spare time, as well as coach other competitive weightlifting athletes remotely. I'm really excited to have him on and hear his insight on everything strength conditioning and weightlifting. So with all that said, let's get into the game with Coach Sean Foster. Hey, so welcome back, guys. I'm here today with my good buddy and former mentor, Sean Foster. Sean is the Assistant Athletic Director at American University for Athletic Performance in D.C. He's a former strongman competitor and weightlifter and is still coaching weightlifting and training avidly in the local area. So, Sean, I appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, happy to be here, and I'm a little offended you called me a former mentor. I would imagine that I still have some type of mentoring capacity towards you, but it's okay. It's okay, Nick. I'm happy to be here and do this podcast with you.
I say former as directly above me, but yeah, I know I lean on you for a lot of stuff constantly, and you continue to be a mentor. So, and I really appreciate that. But let's hop right into it. I mean, this is all about the strength game and how you're still incorporating competing and training and lifting within your coaching style. So started off, how'd you first get involved in sports? What got you interested in training? And then what kind of led you to being involved in weightlifting a little bit?
Yeah, I don't want to give too much of a background here, a deep dive, but I mean, certainly playing sports growing up, most strength coaches realize at an early age, or at least by the time they get to high school, the importance of weight training in their performance. And that was kind of the bug I got, was as I lifted weights, I felt like a better athlete, and that kind of carried over as I continued to play sports. But in terms of becoming a strength coach and getting into actual training, I knew I wanted to be a strength coach. I knew how to coach weightlifting variations, or at least I thought I did. I kind of knew what a strongman lift was, or at least I thought I did. And I wanted to be a strength coach coaching athletes, but it wasn't until I interned at Georgetown University where I met a few coaches that were actual competitors and actually trained strength sports. So my first boss, Augie Morelli, was a pretty accomplished Olympic weightlifter. By the time I worked for him, he was no longer competing, but also Carl Johnson was on that staff, and he was like a strength sport extraordinaire where he dabbled in powerlifting, geared powerlifting, strongman, Olympic lifting, everything you could imagine. So I kind of got a crash course as an intern on the different sports, on strongman. He called me a strongman competitor. That's a very gracious assessment, I would say. I started training and competing in strongman with Carl, but I quickly moved on from that for a variety of reasons. I enjoyed weightlifting probably the most. I found it the most physically and mentally challenging, but also the most rewarding, and that's what I really gravitated towards it. I started training pretty consistently in 2010. I started to get what I would consider to become a decent weightlifter, but I had a significant knee surgery. I had a microfracture procedure on my knee done in 2011, and that kind of took me out of training for almost 2 years. So that set me back quite a bit, and it wasn't really until I got to my new position at American that I rededicated myself to training and competing.
Yeah. Yeah, I was trying to be nice about the strongman stuff, but
It's okay. Yeah.
yeah. Carl's awesome. He's a dabbler in a little bit of everything, so I know that definitely influenced you going through. In terms of, I know, choosing weightlifting, and you're really involved with that, and honestly, I learned pretty much most of my weightlifting, teaching, implementing, all that stuff from you. How has it kind of evolved from your time being introduced with it at Georgetown to the point where now it's a staple in your program and it's what you teach your athletes from the very beginning now in American?
Well, I'd first say it's not necessarily something we teach them from the very beginning. We can get into kind of our learning mechanisms and how we structure training. That progression, like I said, when I worked with Carl when I was at Georgetown, I felt like I was a pretty competent teacher of the Olympic lifts to athletes and introducing them to athletes and getting a men's lacrosse team of 60 guys to competently clean and semi-competently snatch. But it wasn't until I got to American I hired my first assistant coach. That was someone by the name of Alex Lee, who actually left the strength conditioning field to train as a full-time weightlifter under Donnie Schenkel and John North for a period of time. And when I hired him to be my assistant, I actually got to see someone that knew truly how to train and truly how to coach the Olympic lifts, not just for athletes, but for improving weightlifters. And I think that gave me a whole new perspective on the importance of coaching with intent and detail on every portion of the lift, and also how to program not just for student athletes, but also for weightlifting. So I would say I would credit him for really pushing me into the deep end, so to speak, on the importance of teaching everything properly, the importance of taking time and teaching things properly, but also in how to program those lifts and put athletes in a position to really improve with those lifts and not just have them lift heavy, have them do those lifts to improve their athletic performance.
Right. Yeah, I remember watching Alex when he was with you at American, and he was a very proficient lifter, very technical. Like it was awesome to watch him. And same thing, I grew up watching Donnie Schenkel videos and John North ones. To the point I still like to look at the old Cal Strength ones. It taught me a lot. You kind of touched on it a little bit, and Alex being a big proponent of that stuff. What's kind of the biggest difference you see between maybe teaching the Olympic lifts and actually implementing them with a true weightlifter versus how you implement them and put them into the program in a sports performance and team setting?
Well, it's drastic. Your goals have to be completely different. So the weightlifters that I train, the sport is to lift the maximum amount of weight over your head in 3 attempts on a snatch and then 3 attempts on a clean and jerk. So you are gearing all of their training for the ability of lifting those maximal loads in competition. Whereas a volleyball player, I really could care less what they clean. It's an unimportant statistic, how much they clean at some point, where I'm using those lifts instead to drive qualities of force production, to drive coordination, control, eccentric strength,
Right.
all things that we want to build using weightlifting variations. So the training is obviously different. My athletes are never taking heavy singles on snatch or clean and jerk for the sake of heavy singles. I'm not allowing them to miss. I'm not allowing them to go after weights they shouldn't be necessarily going after in a completely controlled environment. Whereas a weightlifter, there are times where you have controlled settings and you're putting numbers on the program that they may or may not make that day. For my athletes, I want them to have weights in their hands that they know 100% with 100% confidence they can make every single time. So the biggest difference between training a weightlifter and a student athlete is everything. Everything is different. The only thing that's the same is the variation is a derivative of the full movement. So they're doing a version of the clean where the weightlifter is performing a clean and jerk or they're performing a full snatch.
Gotcha. Yeah, I remember watching your guys, and I see all the videos from, and there's no misses ever. And you touched on it a little bit too, the confidence building that you get from actually hitting percentages and hitting your lifts consistently and building a technique and proficiency to it, which is huge. When you actually go about introducing these weightlifting derivatives and concepts with novice athletes, I know that your program is pretty in depth about what you do between a mobility standpoint and setup and positions and everything. But can you briefly touch on how you introduce that to a new athlete into your program?
Yeah, definitely. We take our time. I think that's the most important thing to understand if you're introducing a highly complex movement is you have to make it less complex, and you also have to make sure the athlete's capable of performing it well. So the biggest mistake that I see strength coaches make, and a huge mistake I made early in my career, is thinking that, all right, it's day one, I want to do cleans, let's clean. Whereas instead you have to step back and really assess what an athlete needs to be able to do to clean well. So if an athlete is going to do a very efficient clean, they need to be able to front rack, front squat without any pain or discomfort in their wrists. They need to be able to perform a full depth front squat. So getting through a full range of motion, completely close the knee, close the ankle, close the hip joint. And they also need to be able to perform a push press with the bar in the front rack position, where that's going to teach the proper dip and drive of the top position of the clean. That's going to reinforce also that front rack position. So if an athlete can perform these various derivatives and also perform a clean grip style RDL, I would be comfortable teaching them how to clean in the simplest variation. So that requires a good amount of prep work. So 4 to 8 weeks of where an athlete is performing those derivatives as part of their program. So the goal of the program isn't, all right, let's get this soccer player to clean. We're just going to put in exercises in their first couple months on campus that if they perform them well, they're going to have the capabilities to clean. It doesn't necessarily mean we're going to have them clean, but they're going to have that built into their program that if we say, all right, we're going to go to our power position, we're going to jump and catch the bar from this high hang position, front rack it, and then front squat it down, they can do all of those things with a high level of proficiency, and it sets them up for success. Same thing with snatch. If you're going to have an athlete snatch, they have to be able to do a full range of motion overhead squat. They have to be able to do a snatch grip push press behind the neck without pain in their wrists and their shoulders. And you have to teach them how to do a snatch grip RDL so they're comfortable with the range of motion of the wider grip, of getting the bar close to their center of gravity when they complete the pull. So again, when you set them up in your very first variation of the snatch, it's not an incredibly awkward movement where they can pick it up relatively quickly. The big challenge you run into teaching Olympic lifts is if you don't have the requisite mobility or skill to perform those lifts with those feeder movements, what's going to happen when you first do it? It's probably going to be painful. It's probably going to be really awkward, really uncomfortable. And as a coach, you're going to get very frustrated right away with your athletes. Whereas you want the athletes to be really comfortable with those lifts when you introduce them, so you don't have a lot of significant pushback where, coach, this hurts my wrists, coach, this hurts my back. If you build in all of those movements ahead of time, none of that happens. None of that pops up. So if everything goes well, we'll introduce some type of variation after 4, 6, 8, depending on the speed the athlete picks up the derivative movements, or I guess the feeder movements, let's say.
Right. No, I like that. It makes too much sense to not make actual sense. I don't understand why more people don't follow that method and not try to rush ahead and start slow cooking your athletes and make sure that they can even get in the right positions. They can even do it with no barbell first. There's no reason to load a dysfunctional movement like that and teach them something so complex right from the get-go. For the most part, I know with your athletes and the same as mine, we're going to have them for 4 years. So what's the point in rushing and then also getting them hurt or not enjoying training when that's going to be the staple and basis of your program for the next 4 years? So
yeah, absolutely. And again, there's no reason to rush really anything in our training. You're not under the gun as a strength coach to improve someone's strength or vertical jump or 40 in a 4-week period. and if we're in the college setting, if you're in the private sector and you get an athlete for a 4-week chunk and you're making promises about how much you can improve them, you probably have to rush through some things for better or for worse. But in the college setting, right, I'm getting a freshman and I know I'm going to be training them for the next 4 years. So there is absolutely no reason to rush into movements or rush into load that they might not necessarily be able to handle.
Yeah, you're completely right. And I mean, I don't understand why more people don't see that. I don't even want to get into private sector making broken promises like that. It is what it is. But with the current climate of everything going on and the situation that we're kind of both dealing with, I know that unfortunately your staff and your school is now going to be delayed even more with fall sports being canceled. I know that Olympic lifting and those derivatives and everything aren't all you do within your program, and there are still other pieces you have to touch on, obviously. But with this going on, do you have any ways that you're going to have to manage these at-home programs and training with the athletes when a lot of what you program for is barbell dependent?
I think it's the same thing everybody's going through. Every strength coach is going through these similar challenges. I doubt there are any or few strength coaches in the country that the majority of their program is not barbell dependent. The majority of ours is just because of our facility, what we have access to and what we have success with. But certainly it's been an issue for the last 4.5 months, and it's going to be an issue for the next 4.5, 5, most likely for us. What we have to do is work with our athletes individually and see what they have access to. Some of our athletes, especially that were in Europe or Africa, there were periods they were not allowed to set foot outside of their house for an extended period of time during their quarantine. So we had to be very creative on the type of programming they can do. Some of our athletes have some dumbbells, some of them have barbells, some of them have backpacks they can fill with books and rocks. And the most important thing for me to recognize right now is that for all of our teams, they're very far out from a competitive season, is that they have a very long way to go until we're competing again. So we can train qualities that are not the most specific to their sport. So we can build a lot of work capacity. We can build a lot of aerobic fitness. We can focus a lot on mobility. We can focus a lot on time under tension, a lot of things that we would not put a tremendous amount of focus on when we're close to our competitive season, or if our athletes are in a 20-hour a week practice period. I can't say we have a specific program we give out because we have wrestlers and we have swimmers. So our programs are drastically different based on these, but we're just trying to focus on improving the qualities we can with the constraints we have. And it's the same thing everybody else is going through right now. And we're just hoping that whenever we get our athletes back on campus, they have maintained some of those qualities so we can ramp up training in a safe but relatively quick way.
Right. Yeah, I like that too, because especially for basketball players or sports like that, where, and a lot of, like you said, some of your athletes are overseas, European, where their seasons kind of just continue to melt into the next one. This might be the only opportunity that any of these athletes have really had a designated time off from competition and practice since maybe they were youth.
Oh yeah,
so
certainly.
This is a great time to be able to focus on some things that you necessarily wouldn't really have time in a traditional collegiate setting. So you kind of touched on it, and you briefly mentioned when you talked about the confidence that you're building when you're not missing lifts and stuff like that. I know a big thing, especially when I was interning again with you at American, and just with the staffs you've had and your interns and even athletes that are missing lifts, is the atmosphere that you guys are building in the middle of the day, where makeup lifts and just basically staff lifts, you guys getting after it. What do you kind of see as a big benefit between athletes, fellow coaches, and even the whole athletic department from creating that atmosphere and that culture where you guys are leading by example and training yourselves and getting some personal time one-on-one with athletes that maybe need a little bit more?
Yeah, that's a multi-part question. I guess in terms of having one-on-one time with the athletes, with the way we're structured, we do have some open periods where athletes come in for makeup lifts or extra lifts. And earlier in my career, when I cared more about training, I would say I would lift a lot during those periods. As we have a couple athletes in, hey, I'm going to coach you while you're in, and I'm also going to lift some weights because that's so valuable to me. As I've gotten a little bit older, as I've been an American longer, I've tried to do that less and less. As if an athlete's coming in and it's our open time, or even if it's our lunch hour, I'm not going to train. I'm going to coach them and try to give them attention and use that time to improve them as best as I can. Now, if we're closed, if we have a staff lifting period, of course, we'll train at that point. But in terms of that crossover of lifting in front of athletes or doing that, I've definitely shied away from that a bit, just because my job is to train them. And I've found that if they see that you are working out and not coaching them when they're in the room, that can have a little bit of a negative effect. Not that there's anything wrong with that. It's just my personal experience with the athletes I've coached. But in terms of cultivating like a staff lifting atmosphere or bringing the athletic department in, I think that's very important. Not just because you are developing some camaraderie with your staff, you're training together, but it also motivates you as a coach to compete within your staff, to push each other as a staff. And as a competitor yourself, you know the importance of training for a strength sport if you are a strength coach. You don't have to be a national champion weightlifter or an elite strongman to be a good strength coach. But from what I've found, to be a good strength coach, you have to, at some point in your career or consistently, train for a strength sport in some capacity. Even if it's not a competition, you have to try to get stronger. And you have to try to improve at a sport that's difficult, like strongman, like powerlifting, like weightlifting, because then you'll understand what it's like to try to get stronger and hold yourself accountable to a program and push through fatigue and push through some difficulties of programming and put yourself under pressure if there's a competition coming up. And I've always found the strength coaches that I think do the best job or that run a really strong program or teach lifts really well are those that perform them, not necessarily at the highest level, but perform them consistently and are always trying to improve those lifts. The other thing was just welcoming staff into the weight room, is have an open lift period, and you never know who's going to show up. We had a period in 2016, 2017, I think, where almost all of our athletic trainers were in there lifting with us during lunch. And that's awesome. Of trust, you were there, I think. And it helps with training as well. They're going to come in and lift with us and talk to us about training and programming, and they're going to learn about what we're doing, and then we'll in hand pick their brain about what they're doing. So it just creates more crossover within those staffs, especially with the athletic training staff.
I love that. Yeah. I did get to witness both of those things, and you being able to talk in a kind of informal setting with your athletic trainers about stuff that's going on or things that you would say in passing. But I mean, as coaches and as athletic trainers, we're just constantly overwhelmed with information and meetings and emails and stuff. It's nice to be able to kind of multitask in a way and detach from what we're doing, but still be able to talk to each other and relate and get some information by. And it validates what you do for them. And at the same time, you can have discussions with them about what you're doing with your program, and they can understand that what you're doing in the weight room is the best thing for the athletes. So honestly, that gives them a little more trust, especially for rehabs, to give athletes to you sooner or to be able to be involved a little bit more, because I think both our departments, if you're good at your job, you try to hold your athletes closer, because everybody has a little bit of ego about it. So certainly you think you know what's best for the athlete, and it's better when you both understand each other and where you're coming from, that you both can be on the same page and pass off the athlete and put them in the right hands of the person that needs them at that certain point, which is great.
Yeah, and that trust goes far with our athletic training staff. We get post-ACL surgery student athletes between 8 and 12 weeks in the weight room, which is extremely early for our profession. But just we have such a strong relationship with our athletic training staff. They understand that we're going to build upon the program they're putting a post-surgical athlete in. And it allows for the best outcomes for everybody because we get the strength coach involved early in the process, and we get a huge crossover between the athletic trainer and the strength conditioning staff, not just, hey, the athletic trainer has this person from 0 to 4 months, and then we just pass them on to the strength coach and you do whatever it is that you do. We have a lot more crossover in that sense.
Yeah, I like that, where you guys mesh everything together and you're both involved in the whole aspect of what the athlete's doing. It's a great way to do it rather than check your boxes, pass them off, and then there's something in the middle that usually falls by and it ends up being a detriment to the athlete ultimately. With that kind of in mind, with some of the assistants and even interns that you bring in, what kind of advice do you give them in creating those relationships with support staff or trainers, starting their career off in that position?
I think this is maybe not specific to strength and conditioning as a profession, but I feel like it becomes more and more specific the more strength conditioning coaches I know and interact with and see. Is don't be an asshole. Don't be the guy that's in the weight room lifting with his shirt off, blasting heavy metal music, unapproachable. And I know that's a caricature, but we all know strength coaches like that are unapproachable by support staff, unapproachable by sport coaches, unapproachable by athletes that don't know them very well. You have to build relationships with your students, especially on the Olympic side, because we are training sports that don't have a culture of weight training. Football is one thing. Those guys have been lifting weights since they were 14. If you train female swimmers, you train volleyball players, you train men's soccer players, a lot of them are not coming from a lifting background. And you have to make it known to them that you value their sport, you value them, you don't know how much weight they're lifting. And that's something that, again, I was certainly guilty of early in my career, is I just had the mindset that you as a volleyball player, I'm going to treat you and have the same expectations day one as our football team. And that's how you create a lot of pushback right away from your athletes. So what I stress to our interns, my assistant coaches, is be extremely approachable, make sure the athletes know you care about them, and do not take on a very confrontational approach with an athlete or with a team until you've really earned that trust from them. So if you're training a team day one and you're yelling and screaming, everything's on the whistle and you're cursing at them, they don't know you. They have no comprehension of how good of a coach you are. They just see you as a drill sergeant. And that's not necessarily going to create a positive outcome for them. There are times where you have to really lay the law down with your teams and you have to set expectations, you hold people accountable in a negative way. That is absolutely something you have to do as a coach. But I've found that you have to earn that position. You can't come in slashing and burning day one, especially on the Olympic side. And that's one thing that I pride our staff on. I think everyone that's worked for me would absolutely agree that that's something that we try to do at a high level. And I think it manifests itself in very positive experiences for our athletes and quality of training with our athletes, because they're comfortable when they come in the weight room. They know that we have their best interests in mind. When we tell them to do something, they're going to do it well. They're not going to give us a lot of pushback on that.
Yeah, I like that. I think it's a testament to when you bring in your coaches, whether they be interns or assistants, is they're involved with every team, and they might be leading some teams, but they're an assistant on others. They're pretty much on the floor. So I know that was a big issue when I kind of first started, and I had a big background and I really wanted to work with lacrosse, and I got to with you, but you guys kind of threw me to the wolves and had me doing as many teams as possible. And I started to see the different cultures, the different kind of attitudes and backgrounds and demographic all these players were coming from. And it helped shape me in the beginning, because no one wants to be put in a box of you're this specific type of coach.
Right.
And the same thing with being unapproachable as a coach. If you're not coachable as a young coach or even as an old coach and you're not willing to listen to anything, then you're pretty much stuck. And it goes hand in hand with not training anymore. If you think you know everything and you're at the level you're going to be, then you've pretty much lost the war. So
you're not going to improve, and that's going to shortchange yourself and your athletes. So
exactly. With that, do you have any specific resources or recommendations or even coaches that you lean on or follow that you recommend to your interns or first-time coaches when they come in?
I don't want to necessarily say there's like a couple coaches I would lean on. I think it's more of a philosophy on who to follow. So if we are strength and conditioning coaches and we're training athletes using sprint work, or we're using Olympic lifts, or we're using strength movements, or we're using plyometrics, it's very important to seek out the experts in those things, not a strength coach that applies those things. Right. So if someone really wants to learn about the Olympic lifts, you don't seek me out. You seek out elite weightlifting coaches, Dave Spitz, Greg Everett, see what they've written, see how they approach teaching the lifts, see how they apply them, and then you try to take those principles and apply them to training an athlete. Same thing with sprinting. If you want to learn about sprinting, I'm not going to ask my strength coach buddy. I'm going to try to seek out an elite track coach or someone that's developed athletes at a really high level to run fast. And that's going to give me the concepts and the programming that I can then take and apply to my student athletes. But you have to look at it from both ends also. If you're taking a California strength weightlifting program and you're giving it to a field hockey player, you're going to fail pretty miserably. You have to be able to recognize the concepts of what they're trying to teach, right? How do they teach this lift? What coaching points do they use on this lift? How do they program around this type of lift, and then take those principles and apply them to a sensible strength and conditioning program? Same thing with the track. You wouldn't have soccer player run the workout that a 100-meter sprinter would run. It wouldn't be enough volume for a soccer player, but you can learn a lot from those elite track coaches on how they program speed work.
No, I like that. I mean, context is key with all that stuff, but
right.
I mean, learning from the experts and rather than word of mouth or finding where people regurgitate it, it's a big point. I mean, when I go for experts for strength coaches, though, I have to go to you. So, and then I figure out the rest from there.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay.
So, like most training sessions, we end the show with a finisher. So we got 4 quarters, 4 questions.
Oh, okay.
And then potentially overtime. So
lightning round. Okay.
Yeah, you could take as long as you want. You can go as quick as you want with these, but you ready to go?
I don't know. You tell me. Am I? Let's see.
I don't know. I thought the confidence was there. But all right, let's start it off. So biggest influence in strength conditioning and biggest influence in weightlifting.
Biggest influence in strength and conditioning, I'm going to go with my first assistant coach, Alex Lee. We did a lot of things in a similar way when I hired him. That's why I hired him. We had very similar programs, but he did it better than I did. And I tried to talk with him about why the way he did things that I was also doing had better outcomes. And I think I learned a lot from him on streamlining programming and really, for lack of a better term, dumbing down programming, making it really simple, making it very easy to follow, making it very easy to build upon and build the next phase, and also easy to execute. So it's strange saying my biggest influence is someone I didn't work for, but that's absolutely the truth. I feel like he really pushed me in the right direction, I would say. So weightlifting, that's hard to say. My friend Jake Pudens, who's reigning national champion, 109 weightlifter. He actually just retired, lifted for Cal Strength. I've known Jake for about a decade, from when he first started as a weightlifter till he won a national championship last year. And I'm constantly in communication with him, bouncing ideas off of him, talking training, talking weightlifting, sometimes strength conditioning, but he's more in the weightlifting field. So those would probably be my 2 biggest influences.
Gotcha. Outside of coaching and training, what kind of hobbies do you have? What can you be found doing on an off day?
Well, I don't have off days right now because I have 2 kids. I have a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old, and I'm in the house with them every day. So those are my hobbies, are raising my kids at the moment. Before the pandemic hit, I mean, we're doing what every other strength coach does. My hobbies are pretty much training, and then my family life, and trying to spend as much time with my parents, with my in-laws, and maximizing the time we have with them. And now, especially with what we've got going on, trying to find different avenues to make my kids feel like they're being fulfilled in their activities every day, and then making family that we can't see happy as well.
Okay. If you weren't coaching, what career would you be in?
That's a hard one, because I think as a strength coach, if you imagine yourself in any other career, you are not a strength coach, because it is quite a unique profession. I really don't know, to be honest. I don't have an answer. And I think that's a scary answer, because I can't imagine what I would be. But this has been my profession for 11 and a half years. And if I wasn't a strength conditioning coach, I would imagine I'd be something tangential to that. Some type of trainer in some capacity in a private setting.
Well, that might answer the next one. What's the number one quality for a strength coach, and the number one quality for a successful athlete?
Number one quality for a successful strength coach is, I'd go back to my old answer, just being personable and being able to build relationships. It's a relationship building profession. You have to get people to trust you, and you have to get people to put trust in their athletic careers in you. So as a strength coach, you have to be extremely relatable, communicative with your athletes, and be able to build those trusting relationships. For an athlete, from what I've found, it's being able to, on the flip side of that, also trust and understand what your coaches are asking of you and why they're asking it of you, and not just blindly follow a program. You want to have some ask for guidance. Why are we doing this? Why am I squatting sets of 10 right now? Why am I doing this variation of a lift? I've found my most successful athletes are the ones that want to know the why behind things, because they care. If an athlete's just mindlessly going through your lift and they never ask you a question, maybe they're not really invested in it. But the athletes that I've had that have been most successful on the field, on the court, in the weight room are the ones that are saying, hey, why are we doing this exercise today? Why are we doing this new program? Why are we doing this set and rep range?
Okay. All right. Well, we got overtime because I definitely have a follow-up question from something earlier. All right. I know you've gone through the process of renovating the weight room a few times, and I know that down the line there are some talks about renovating it, a new facility.
Yeah,
what are your
process? So.
Yeah, I know it's a process.
Yeah.
What are maybe your top 3, top 5 must-haves when you go about planning this? What's going to be on your purchase order?
Must-haves would be sight lines. You have to have, if you want to be able to train athletes at a high level, you need to be able to see everybody. So my biggest pet peeve is a weight room with racks down the middle and then platforms on the outside of them, because you're immediately slashing your weight room in half. And there's no way you can effectively handle a large group without a lot of coaches. So sight lines. I like to see every rep of every lift of all my athletes. So we're going to have inlaid platforms with racks that create an alley along the outside. That's in terms of actual equipment. This is something that I've been pushing for years to everybody that asks me about it, is women's bars. If you are training female athletes, you must have 15 kilo barbells if you're going to use Olympic lifts, for a variety of reasons. One, they're a little bit thinner. So my men's basketball player that's 6'10", and then my field hockey player that's 5'1", there's no scenario where they should be lifting on the same thickness barbell. It's not going to create the same comfort level, the same control for the shorter athlete, for an athlete with smaller hands. So a 15 kilo bar or a 35 pound bar, whatever it is going to create way more comfort for a female lifter learning how to overhead squat, learning how to snatch, learning how to clean. So those barbells are extremely important if you're going to train female athletes at a high level. They're not very popular in college strength conditioning for whatever reason, but that's probably the best investment I ever made. So when I came to American, we got 15 kilo bars right away. And every female athlete we have, whenever they go home for the summer, they're furious they don't have one, because it allows comfort on the hook grip or comfort holding bar, and just an easier situation to learn for those athletes. And then the final thing would be, I guess, proper equipment for the type of training we do. So if you're going to do Olympic lifts, you have to be able to safely dump the bar. So you need bumper plates. If you're doing Olympic lifts, you have to have bars that rotate. You need bars that have some rotation in the sleeve. So when you turn over a clean or you turn over a catch, turnover or snatch, the catch doesn't feel like it's crashing on you with 1,000 pounds on your shoulders, or it's ripping your shoulder backwards because the bar didn't rotate on the snatch. So that's something that, again, if you're going to implement Olympic lifts, you need that equipment. If I was in a weight room where I did not have bars that spun or bumper plates, I would not use Olympic lifts in my program ever. It would not be safe, and you wouldn't be able to do it at high enough levels to get a training effect.
Well, I'm glad finally someone said those three things, because honestly, around seeing other facilities and training at some of those ones, that's not the norm. So, no, but that's all I got for you, man.
Cool.
I really appreciate you coming on. Like I said before, I've got to work under you twice, and you're someone I still lean on to this day. So I really appreciate you coming on, and I think you guys are doing great things out there. Anybody that works with you you're a wealth of knowledge. So
Appreciate it, Nick. Good to be on. And I'm glad to see your beard is moderate length, not excessive length in this quarantine. Very nice.
we'll see how long quarantine lasts.
Yeah.
That'll be the determinant. But I appreciate it. Thanks again, Sean.
Yeah, good to see you, Nick.
You too.
That's it for this episode of The Strength Game. Thank you again to this week's guest and to our sponsors, Cerberus Strength. Be sure to connect and keep up with our guests at the links in the description below. Remember to subscribe to us on Apple and Google Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast provider to stay up to date on all future episodes. Also, check us out on YouTube and CoachO'Brien.com, where you can find all the video versions of these episodes, as well as show notes, episode schedule, and much more. Comments, ratings, and reviews are always welcome and appreciated. Thanks again for tuning in, and be sure to join us next week for another great episode of The Strength Game.